Welcome to Unveiling Mythical Legends. Before we start, just a quick note. If you enjoy content that mixes science, storytelling, and a bit of mind-bending imagination, make sure to like and subscribe. Because the next story's protagonist will completely challenge how you think about aging. So let me ask a basic yet brutally honest question. From bacteria and insects to humans, almost every form of life seems unable to escape one thing: being born, growing up, aging, and eventually dying.
Exactly. That's practically an ironclad rule written into the very logic of nature. Whether you're a microscopic organism under a microscope or a human at the top of the food chain, the process is basically the same, just the speed differs. Cells divide, wear down, accumulate errors, and eventually the entire system slows and stops. That's why aging is almost universally regarded as an inevitable outcome.
So here's the question. If I told you that there's a creature we see every day in seafood restaurants, and that might even have been on your plate, which almost never ages, would you think I'm making it up?
Honestly, most people's first reaction would be to think you're joking, or that you're about to talk about some microscopic bacteria or a bizarre creature living thousands of meters deep in the ocean. But that's not the case at all. This star is super ordinary, incredibly relatable, and you've definitely heard of it. It's the lobster.
Wait, you mean lobsters? The ones that are alive and kicking, tossed into tanks, and eventually end up on someone's plate?
Exactly, those lobsters. And here's the truly bizarre part. From the moment they're born until the end of their life, they almost never stop growing. It's not like they grow fast when they're young and then slow down as they age. Instead, they keep growing continuously, and their cells show almost none of the aging signals we're so familiar with.
You could say that. Based on what we currently understand about life, all cells that are produced should theoretically age and die. This isn't just humans, almost every animal follows the same rule. But lobsters seem like nature secretly left a backdoor for them.
So they really don't age? Or do they just age more slowly?
That's exactly what both puzzles and fascinates scientists. If you observe a very old lobster, it doesn't just avoid weakness, it often grows bigger and stronger, and in some cases, its reproductive ability can even surpass that of younger individuals.
That's completely unreasonable. When we look at old lions, wolves, or tigers, you can almost immediately tell, time's up. Exactly. Do you remember that legendary male lion called Scarface?
Of course, he was basically a walking war machine.
At its peak, it took on countless rivals, drove off over 400 hyenas, and killed more than 100 competing male lions. But in its later years, its movements slowed, muscles atrophied, and even standing was a struggle. That decline, from king to weakened, seems to be the fate of almost all large animals.
But lobsters don't go through this process?
At least from a biological perspective, it's very subtle, almost non-existent. If you put a 90-year-old lobster into a competitive environment, it can still win against younger lobsters. Scientists first noticed this not because of one exceptionally large individual, but because the phenomenon kept repeating.
So, it's not an exception, it's a pattern?
Exactly. When an anomaly keeps repeating, it's no longer a fluke, it's a signal. Researchers studying lobsters began to notice that even very old lobsters, under tissue analysis, show almost no signs of the typical degeneration associated with aging.
But why is that? Did they somehow get their hands on some cheat code nature wasn't supposed to give them?
Exactly. If I had to sum it up in one sentence, the key lies in something that sounds a bit tongue-twisting but is extremely important, called telomerase.
I think I've heard that name somewhere. It's related to human aging, right?
Exactly. To put it simply, every time a cell divides, the very ends of its DNA get a little bit worn down. Those ends are called telomeres. Think of them like the plastic tips on shoelaces. You don't notice them at first, but over time if they wear down, the whole lace starts to fray.
So the shorter the telomeres, the less the cell can hold up?
Exactly. The job of telomerase is to restore that plastic tip, keeping the DNA intact through repeated cell divisions. In most animals, once they reach adulthood, telomerase activity drops significantly, or even shuts off entirely, and that's when the aging process gradually begins.
What about lobsters?
This is where lobsters really break the rules. They don't just have telomerase when they're young. They produce it almost for their entire lives, and its activity remains remarkably stable. This means their cells can keep dividing efficiently, errors accumulate very slowly, and the usual signs of aging barely show up.
No wonder people say lobsters are immortal.
That statement isn't entirely accurate, but it's not wrong either. It's not that they can't die, but rather that they don't die from aging, at least, not in the way we normally understand old age.
So if you remove predators, disease, accidents, and even humans' dinner plates, theoretically, could they really live forever?
From a purely biological standpoint, yes, age alone is almost incapable of killing a lobster.
Up to this point, the story already sounds unbelievable, but I have a feeling you're about to reveal an even darker twist.
You're right to feel that way, because a lobster's true cause of death isn't in its cells. It lies in that seemingly perfect armor it wears, which actually hides a deadly trap.
You mean that hard shell, the very thing that protects them and makes them look invincible, is actually what ultimately drives them to their end?
Exactly, and what you'll see next is that lobsters are gradually pushed toward their demise simply because they grow too big.
So the real cause of a lobster's death isn't aging, but that insanely cool-looking armor it wears. What's going on there?
The key lies in one word: molting. A lobster's whole body is encased in a hard exoskeleton. When it's young, this shell is an advantage. It protects against predators, resists physical damage, and lets it strut along the seafloor. But here's the problem: the shell is dead tissue. It doesn't grow along with the lobster's body.
So if it wants to grow, it has to completely shed its shell?
Exactly, and it's not like just taking off a jacket. Imagine the lobster in an extremely vulnerable state, having to forcefully crack open a shell that's way too tight, then grow an entirely new, larger shell underneath. The energy this whole process consumes is ridiculously high.
Sounds like every time it grows, it's literally gambling with its life.
Not an exaggeration at all. During molting, lobsters are among the most vulnerable creatures in the ocean. They can't move properly, can't defend themselves, and even their breathing efficiency drops. If anything goes wrong, they can get stuck halfway in their old shell, unable to move, and fall prey to disease or predators.
So this process is easier when they're young, right?
Exactly. Young lobsters can molt several times a year because their bodies are small, their shells are thin, and their muscles can handle it. But as they age, each molt becomes exponentially harder, the shells get thicker, more heavily calcified, and the force required to break free becomes increasingly unreasonable.
So they're not truly immortal? Every time they grow stronger, they're actually increasing their risk of death?
Exactly. And the irony is, this insanely risky molting process is also the only window when lobsters can successfully mate.
Wait, what did you say? They can only mate while molting?
Yes, exactly. Especially female lobsters, they can only mate right after molting, when their new shell is still soft. The males then deposit sperm into a special storage sac inside the female.
So it's not fertilized right away?
No, and here's the crazy part: the sperm can be stored inside her for several months, even longer, until the perfect moment comes. Then the female releases it all at once to complete fertilization.
And then she lays the eggs?
Exactly. A mature female lobster will, about 9 to 12 months after mating, release nearly 100,000 eggs all at once.
100,000? That sounds impressive.
It does sound wild, but in reality it's extremely brutal, because those 100,000 eggs have almost no protection. They're just a massive cloud of life drifting in the water.
So the survival rate must be really low.
Low to an absurd degree. Fewer than 1% actually make it to adulthood. Most get eaten, swept away by currents, or never even get the chance to develop into a full lobster.
The start is basically hardcore mode.
Exactly, and that also explains why the ones you see, those huge, seemingly ageless lobsters, are always just a few. They're the survivors who made it out of an almost impossible survival gauntlet.
So just how enormous can they get?
Let's stick to a conservative, but still outrageous figure. A lobster around 50 years old can exceed 70 centimeters in length and weigh over 20 pounds. That's roughly 600 times its length at birth and 1,000,000 times its initial weight.
That scale is hard to even imagine.
Let me put it in human terms so you get it. If a human grew like a lobster, a baby born 50 centimeters tall and weighing 3 kilograms would, by age 50, reach nearly 300 meters tall, about the height of a 100-story building, and weigh over 3,000 tons, heavier than a large passenger airplane.
This isn't biology anymore, it's a monster movie.
But for lobsters, this is actually a real physical problem. Once their size reaches a certain point, maintaining bodily functions, molting, and supporting their own weight all become practically impossible.
So what you're saying is they're not defeated by time, they're trapped by the physical world?
Exactly. Their cells still want to keep dividing, their organs still want to function, but the whole hardware is starting to fail. Molting, once a necessary step for growth, gradually becomes an almost impossible mission.
So at this stage, what happens to them?
This is when many old lobsters hit a critical turning point. Their molting cycles start stretching out incredibly long. While young lobsters molt several times a year, by the time they reach 50 or 70, it can take years to build up enough energy for a single molt.
And with each attempt, the risk of failure gets even higher?
Exactly. Eventually, a situation arises where it's not that they choose not to molt, the next molt simply never happens.
So they end up stuck in that old shell?
Exactly. Without a new shell to replace it, their body is still trying to function, but movement becomes increasingly restricted, stress builds up, infection risk skyrockets, and their internal structures gradually start to fail.
So there really are lobsters that live over 100 years and grow to sizes that seem unreal? How extreme are we talking?
Extreme enough that if you see a photo for the first time, you'd think it's a movie prop or a model made by a film crew. The largest recorded lobster was caught off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, in 1977.
I think I've heard about that one.
Yeah, it weighed about 20 kilograms, or 44 pounds, and measured over a meter long. Honestly, this isn't the lobster you normally imagine. It's like a heavily armored, underwater tank with massive claws attached.
How old was it roughly?
That's the tricky and fascinating part. Lobsters don't have birth certificates, and they don't leave growth rings. Scientists have to estimate their age based on size, shell condition, and wear. That particular lobster was conservatively estimated to be over 100 years old.
So basically, it lived all the way from the 19th century to the modern day?
Pretty much. While humans were fighting wars, going through the Industrial Revolution, and experiencing technological booms, it was down in the ocean, day after day avoiding predators, surviving diseases, and molting over and over again, accomplishing what's almost impossible.
Just that alone already feels unreal.
And it's not even the only exception. In the so-called Weird Wonders of Nature Club, these giant lobsters show up every few years. Usually, they're not deliberately hunted, they just get holed up during deep-sea trawling operations.
So basically, they weren't meant to be seen by humans?
Exactly. They represent an incredibly rare survivor, an individual that has made it all the way through a system with an absurdly high mortality rate.
But like you said earlier, being that big actually makes them more vulnerable, right?
Extremely vulnerable. Once a lobster reaches that size, it's basically standing at the very edge of its physical limits.
What do you mean by that?
I mean their shells are often heavily worn, pitted and scarred, some claws have even broken and barely healed. Their joints are stiff, movement is restricted, and some individuals can barely lift their massive claws anymore.
That doesn't sound like an underwater powerhouse. It sounds more like a struggling old veteran.
That's a perfect way to put it. They don't look like monsters ready to fight another battle. Instead, they move slowly through time like worn-out tanks, relying on momentum, experience, and a bit of luck.
So what's their true end? Their final battle?
Almost never. For lobsters, the real end isn't a grand showdown, it's a very quiet, almost completely undramatic system failure.
So it's like being trapped in a shell that keeps getting too tight.
Exactly. Their muscles atrophy from limited movement, internal organs endure increasing stress, and the immune system starts to fail, making them extremely vulnerable to infections.
But their cells are theoretically still young.
And that's the cruelest irony. Biologically, their program is still ready to run, but the hardware supporting it is collapsing piece by piece.
Have scientists actually dissected these ancient lobsters?
Yes, and the results are actually quite unsettling. In these gigantic, extremely old lobsters, you can often see clear signs of disease, muscle deterioration, and organ compression, problems that were virtually non-existent during their prime years.
Hearing this, the phrase "lobsters don't age" almost sounds like a dark joke.
Exactly. They don't age in the way we're used to, but that doesn't mean they escape nature's rules. It just happens in a different, sometimes harsher way.
So if you really want to know what happens to a lobster if it lives too long,
the answer is simple and brutal. It doesn't fall at its peak, it slowly reaches an invisible red line and can't cross it anymore.
after hearing this whole story, I suddenly feel like lobsters aren't really symbols of immortality, they're more like a warning.
A warning that no matter how long you manage to dodge time, you can never escape your limits. Nature never lets you go further than it allows, it's never infinite.
So basically, lobsters haven't defeated death, they've just reached the end in a very different way.
Exactly, and that's what makes them so fascinating and yet so tragic. If you enjoyed today's journey into lobsters, immortality, and limits, don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe to our channel with the notification bell on, because next time, we'll take you to even more unbelievable stories.